are you?
I'm great.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me.
So you spent 25 years at Morgan Stanley?
More than that.
More than that. You're now at an investment fund, so congratulations on embodying the big story on Wall Street over the last number of years.
Thank you.
Just this shift in money, in talent, in interesting stuff going on, sort of the bleeding edge of finance, for out of banks and into investment funds. And where are we in that story?
Interesting. We're going to talk about my old job first, I guess. I retired about a year and a half ago after a fabulous career at Morgan Stanley, and I would say there is still plenty of opportunity to have fabulous careers at Morgan Stanley and other firms like it, but I decided I was looking for something different. Different for me was private. It was learning something new, and it was not having to deal with the Fed, the OCC, the FCA, the FSA, HKMA, whatever laundry list of regulators around the world, particularly around a bank holding company. I was just looking to do something that was a little more growthy and a little more fun after having a great career at Morgan Stanley. But I still think places like Morgan Stanley are great firms to make careers, to learn, and to meet great colleagues.
But looking at this huge amount of assets and risks that have come out of the banks, mostly on purpose, but I'm curious kind of what you make of that. But at the end of this road that banks are sort of just utilities, kind of renting their balance sheet.
I guess the bank is dead. Here, hail the bank. I mean, the banks have died many, many, many times before, and I don't think this is any different. If you go back, even when I started my career in the early '90s. If a bank had a customer and that customer only had a loan product, that customer was wildly unprofitable. And I think you're seeing that more today than ever. Since I retired, nothing good has happened for bank profitability, right? Post Silicon Valley, you've got less deposits, wholesale funding is more expensive, you have to have more liquidity, more long-term debt, you probably have to have more compliance and risk people. You probably need more capital, so as a profitability matter, the banks are going to make less money. Doesn't mean they're going to disappear. It doesn't mean they're not good investments, but by definition, they're going to make less money. And so they have to optimize their balance sheet. I think a lot of the things that you're seeing are places where they're not generating the right returns for their cost of capital and their leverage, and some of that is moving into the private capital markets, which I think is a good thing for a borrower. If a borrower has choices on where they can get their money and they have a competitive dynamic around where they can get their money, that's better for the borrower. And ultimately, if the other providers can get the right return, it's better for the system.
But before you were CFO at Morgan Stanley, you were a banker, you were an investment banker whose clients were other banks.
Correct.
Right?
That is correct.
Do we have too many banks in this country?
Yes, we've always had too many banks in this country. I think we need to sort of be probably Canada on steroids, and I think John had mentioned this earlier about not wanting to be in the middle. You need to either be really big or really niche-y. And if you talk to Governor Cirulo or Governor Quarles or some of the people, and I didn't have an opportunity to spend time with Governor Barr, but they would tell you they would rather regulate one $200 billion bank than 10, $20 billion banks because they have more resources, they should be more sophisticated, they can be regulated more easily, and I still think that is the case. We haven't seen that because I think there's a lot of impediments to getting transactions done, but I would argue that you need, I think Canada's got 6 banks and a lot of little ones. I think you probably need 30 or 40 banks and then a lot of little ones, but all these banks in the middle, I think are going to come under immense pressure because competing against people that have $2 trillion, $3 trillion balance sheets, it gets harder and harder.
You're talking about Michael Barr, Dan Cirulo, these are the senior people at the Fed whose job it is to regulate the banks. You spent time with that crew in 2008, 9, 10, while they kind of wrote a lot of these rules that have pushed a lot of this risk out of the banks and into firms like Pretium. We are going to talk about your actual job in just a second.
My new job, okay.
But do you think this is what they had in mind? This sort of, it left the banks, depositors are presumably safer, though last spring maybe raises some questions about that. But all that risk went somewhere. Do you think they envisioned a system like the one we have now, where I can sit here and talk to Anant about these giant insurance firms holding on to money?
Yeah, I think they did. I think they wanted to push certain risk out of the banking system, which they needed to protect the depositors, and I think they did that. But if you go back to the global financial crisis, I mean, again, most of the stress started outside the banking system, whether it was Bear or Lehman or AIG or all the other firms that ultimately infected the banks. And what did the Fed do? They took the last two large investment banks, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, made them bank holding companies overnight because they wanted to regulate them. And I think you've seen that again today, which is they pushed a lot of the risk out of the banking system. Either that risk has disappeared or someone else stepped into that place. And assuming the next cycle or the next issue that we have, the people who have made those investments and the underlying investors can absorb those losses, you'll see a credit cycle, or these are risk businesses. When you put money at risk, sometimes you lose it. And as long as it doesn't infect the banking system, I think the regulators would be super happy. Now, if it does, you'll see what you've seen many times before, which is either they expand the umbrella, recapture the risk so they can keep a better eye on it, bail out the system, whatever terminology.
What turns a cycle into a crisis?
Well, if the failure of a single bank is going to lead to the failure of every bank in the country, which is what you started to see at Silicon Valley, I think that's a crisis. When pension funds, unfortunately, retail investors, institutional investors go through a normal credit cycle and their returns are muted or negative for a period of time, that's called the credit cycle or an economic cycle or potentially even a recession. But I think, at this point, we've been in a situation where events have led to crises that have required massive government intervention, and whether you want to think of COVID or the global financial crisis, and those are sort of the two that we've had in the recent past, and I think that's why people get worried that this starts to snowball.
So we don't know how to have a cycle anymore.
I don't think we've had one. I mean, there's been these mini cycles in energy or in transportation, but we haven't really seen a real credit cycle, a traditional bank credit cycle where you go into a recession and unemployment goes up, people lose their jobs, and people stop paying, and it sort of works through the system.
Yeah. So Pretium is the largest owner of single-family rentals in the country, right? Mm-hmm. The share of homes for sale that have gone to institutional investors has been rising as, I will not say it's correlated, I won't say it's causal, it's correlated, and I want you to sort of explain how you think about this. At a moment, frankly, when people who want to buy homes either can't find them, can't afford them, and it's created this sort of monsoon of public policy and hand-wringing. And a very open-ended question.
Literally, the first question you're going to ask me about my new job is why institutional investors have made housing unaffordable for the average American.
But
I don't think that's particularly fair. We spent a lot of time on Morgan Stanley and bank regulation, so I get to do my Pretium pitch or no? All right.
Absolutely.
So, good public policy in this country is ways, incentives, options, programs that provide for people to want to build more houses, whether that's through permitting or tax incentives, but also affordable housing, and that could be through the rental market. We as a country have, depending on which survey or which group you want to look at, an undersupply of housing somewhere between 3 and 7 million units. And since the global financial crisis, we have been significantly underbuilding. So before the global financial crisis, about 1 million homes a year were built. Since then, it's averaged 500,000 or 600,000. So we have undersupply, and we are not building new houses. And by the way, this cohort called the millennials are about to want to start to buy homes or live in homes. And also the baby boomers seem to want to age in place and not die and live in homes longer. And so we have a significant shortage of housing, okay? The top 40 institutional owners of single-family rentals in this country own 400,000 houses, or less than 3% of the stock. There has been 10 to 12% rental houses in this country for the last 50 years. That number has been reasonably stable. home ownership is going up. It's actually at 66%, which is above its long-term average. So again, the 400,000 homes that the top 40 institutional investors have bought have not led to the affordability problem of housing in this country. We actually think we can be part of the solution. We get better resident experience, better maintenance, 24/7. We, as an industry, are doing better than the traditional mom and pop who own 2 or 3 units. We've also just raised a fund that is buying houses directly from home builders called Build to Rent. So we're helping home builders turn their balance sheet faster and build more homes. So we're actually adding to the stock. We also generally buy and sell homes. So actually the industry hasn't grown in the last 3 or 4 years. So this idea that we're taking homes away from people is just, it's a narrative. We wouldn't agree with that narrative, and we think we can be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
One of the big sources of financing for lots of corners of construction, particularly, were the regional banks.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that there's a gap in the market there that you guys are looking to fill?
Yeah, no, we would love to fill that gap. Again, residential construction housing, a lot of the banks have started to move away from that as a product, again, unless you have a significant broader relationship with that home builder. And so we think, given that we own 100,000 homes across the United States, we know how much they rent for, we know how much it costs to renovate them, to build them, to sell them, to buy them. We feel like we can step into that void and either partner with banks in a flow or just find new relationships that the banks are stepping away from. So sort of residential real estate debt, we think, is a significant opportunity. It's also obviously in today's environment, given that you're secured, better structured, and you can generate reasonable returns and almost equity-like returns. So I think our LPs and our investors are more interested in that product than the real estate equity product today.
Then quickly on a rates one, looks like maybe one cut this year. Obviously, it's a huge input into the turnover.
Rates?
Yeah.
Jesus, like
what mortgages
I
come
have
from.
a new job. It's at Pretium.
And mortgages, I believe.
I
less
would
than the
say,
benchmark.
again, I don't know why anyone would care what I say, but I would say one cut post-election. I think they missed the opportunity to cut pre-election, which I thought they would have. And I think 2025 actually gets very, very complicated.
Well, I was really going to ask not so much like when they start, but particularly on the back end, how quickly they come down, what that means for turnover in the housing market in particular, which is a place that you obviously spend a lot of your time.
Yes. Oh, thank you. You're trying to tie this to housing.
All the
I
way
like that.
back.
Mortgage rates, maybe. I think it's really tricky. I think if you look at between, again, someone can decide who the president is, but we're going to have more defense spending. We have cost of living adjustments in a lot of the social programs. We're going to have a lot of pressure on inflation. And so I'm not as aggressive on rate cuts in 2025 as some others are. And I think it's going to be a challenging period of time for the Fed to try to figure this out, because I think there are a tremendous amount of inflationary pressure that we'll see in 2025. But I do think they will cut to show the world that we're moving in that direction, but how fast and where we go from there, I think is going to be a bigger question.
We'll end on that happy note.
Thank you very much. Thank you.